Hi, I'm Adrienne from Summit County Government. Welcome to County Connections. I am joined by Commissioner Tamara Pogue, who will be joining us this morning to talk about mostly property taxes. That's kind of the hot button topic on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
So Tamara, let's start with basics,
Okay.
right? Tell me a little bit about how Colorado property taxes work, especially compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah. First of all, I want to welcome Adrienne to our team. She is our new communications director, and it is great to have her on board.
Thank you.
All right. So property taxes, what everybody in Summit County is talking about. I do think it's important to recognize, and some people, especially those that have second homes elsewhere, do recognize this. But Summit County has the lowest residential property tax rates in the nation. And so while the dramatic increase that we've just seen in the last cycle due to the dramatic increase in our property values is incredibly painful for folks, I mean, it's certainly painful for me as a single mom. While that is very painful, we also do have to make a connection between the kinds of services that folks receive and how much money they spend to get those services. When you exist in this low of a property tax environment, some things just won't get done. And so when folks reach out to complain about the potholes or not having enough enforcement on the rec path, those are the types of things that property taxes fund in our state. And because there is so little revenue for local government, that's some of the problems that you see develop. And so at the county, we've tried to take a really balanced approach to this, make sure that we have enough money to pay for the services that our residents demand, but also be really sensitive to the increase in valuation and that just being another component of the unaffordability of Summit County.
You know, as a first-time home buyer myself within this last year, I'm learning a lot about how property taxes and valuations work.
Yeah.
You mentioned valuations. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so property taxes are also very complicated. And the way it works in Colorado is that the conversation about your actual bill is driven by a number of different factors. So first off, you have the value of your property. That value actually gets adjusted into the whole formula. And it's further adjusted by a number of different pieces of legislation that have been passed in the past 3 years and an exemption. So in this cycle that we're in right now, everybody got a $55,000 exemption off of their value.
Okay.
And moving forward, that way that valuation is calculated is going to be adjusted. And so I don't need to get into the details of that, but it's going to look a little different in your next property tax bill in the next valuation cycle. So we start with the value of your property. That is multiplied by the assessment rate. And the assessment rate is actually set by the state legislature. So the state legislature, once Gallagher was repealed by the voters, and Gallagher was really the mechanism that protected folks against these really big increases. But the voters repealed that because Gallagher had some unintended consequences. Like, while we have the lowest residential assessment rate in the country, we actually have one of the highest commercial rates in the country. And so, you know, Gallagher sort of pushed this farther apart. Anyway, long story short, you've got your property tax value times your assessment, which is set by the legislature. The legislature has done 3 progressive decreases. And right now that rate sits at 6.5%. A few years ago, it was actually 7.5%. So that's a significant decrease.
That's a big help.
It's a big help for sure. And then the last piece of it is something called the mill levy. And the mill levy is what local government, like the county, controls. So in Summit County, our mill levy is made up of what I like to say a third, a third, a third. So a third of the mill goes to Summit County government, a third of the mill goes to the school district, and a third of the mill goes to the 42 special districts in Summit County. Okay. Those special districts include fire and emergency medical services, water, sewer, lots of different things. So everybody's property tax bill in Summit County looks a little different based on which of those special districts you're in. I'll start with the special districts first. Each of those special districts is run by a board. So if you are in, let's say you live in Dillon and you're part of Summit Fire and EMS, you'll see a mill specifically for Summit Fire and EMS. And if you have concerns about that mill, you should reach out directly to their bill.
Because those boards, a lot of them are elected. Is that the case?
A lot of those boards are elected, but often there's not a lot of interest in those elections. And so folks may not realize who their board representatives are at Summit Fire and EMS or whatever the water and sewer district you're a part of is.
And there's power in your voice.
For sure.
Right.
Yes. So always encourage folks to reach out, not just to the county, but to all of these different entities. Okay, so the next third is the school district. Now, school finance is a beast. It's very complicated. But what folks really do need to understand is the way schools are funded in this state, there's a state share and a local share. So when schools locally collect more money, that means that the state share actually decreases. It's sort of a matching mechanism. Rural resort communities tend to have school districts that contribute the largest amount of local share, and so they receive the lowest amount of state share. When they saw an increase in valuation, they did see some more money, but when folks have this like massive 43% increase in their brain, the school districts don't see that because they just end up contributing more locally and receiving less backfill from the state. So they've not seen huge increases. So then you come to the county in our third. And what's important to understand about the county's third is that 2/3 of that third, it's always easier to do this with a whiteboard, right? 2/3 of that third is actually what's called voter-approved mill levies. So those funds are specifically dedicated to certain things that the voters have approved. Things like Strong Future, which funds behavioral health and access to early childhood care, wildfire mitigation, recycling, things like housing, right? Things like Right Start, which was an early child care mill, our open space mill levy. All of those things are controlled by the voters. When those were passed by the voters, they were done in two ways. One is what's called a mill levy float, which says we're only going to collect $2 million for this purpose. And so anything above $2 million, we lower the mill to compensate for. And then the others are a certain set mill, right? And so as the value goes up, more money comes in for that. And obviously the voters think about those differently, right? The voters may not have thought we needed to spend more than, let's say, $2 million on open space every year, but they wanted the behavioral health money, for example, to increase as inflation and as values increased. So that's 2/3. And then the remaining 1/3 is what we call general fund. That is all the money for law enforcement. The coroner, roads is a big piece of that. Planning and zoning and land use is a big piece of that. Human services is another really big piece of that. So the counties do all of the human services for the state. We implement Medicaid, we implement SNAP benefits, TANF, all of those things. So that's another big piece of what that remaining third goes to. So the question had become really, do we want to decrease the mill levies on some of those voter approved, right? Some of the things that we know the voters said we really support, and our general fund. And while I personally supported decreasing the county's mill, I was in the minority, I didn't win this. And so the county didn't decrease our mill. But what you do see is a natural decrease in our mill, right? Because it goes back to those voter approved mills and the fact that some of them are a dollar amount of collection, not a percentage and a value collection. So we have a natural decrease in our mill, essentially. So in our portion of your overall tax bill, you saw our mill go down. Some of the special districts made different decisions. Some of the special districts made decisions to increase their mills. And then the school district mill also stays the same, essentially. Okay. So that's how it all works. Clear as mud, I know. But we have a great website, fundingsummitcounty.com, I think it is. And if folks have more questions or, like me, are visual and need to see things written down, that's where you can go to really learn more of what I just talked about.
We'll throw links to those websites on the description of this video so you can see where your property taxes are going. You can also find the full Summit County budget online at summitcountyco.gov. Thanks, and we'll be right back.